This is Spare Time Repair, and this is a Marantz CD5400 from 2004. This is not only the newest CD player I've featured, but also the first to have a digital output. Another notable feature is this dot matrix display that can show CD text from those rare compliant discs. So why did I purchase this relative spring chicken when normally I go for older machines? Well, to be honest, it was just so cheap I couldn't turn it down. Including shipping, I paid just $24, 2/3 of which was the shipping cost. You may have noticed that it did come with some compromises though. The missing tray front is hard to ignore, and the open-close button has also disappeared. But even if you reach inside its hole and press the switch, the tray won't open. There is a disc stuck inside that it will read and play without issue, so at least I know this player is otherwise in good order. But even if I can get the tray working, is it ever going to look any good? I'm hoping that that missing open-close button has just fallen inside the player, because I'm not sure how I would make a new one yet. But I do have a plan for the missing tray front, which we'll get to in due course. Well, it looks like a Sony transport. Got a couple of large ferrite beads in here, and my free CD appears to be Change My Heart, Oh God. Great, haven't got that one. I'm going to start by removing this clamp, see whether there's an obvious cause for the tray not opening. Well, it is a Sony pickup. It's a KSS213C. It's actually got a Sony branding on the shroud. I've not seen that before. Well, I say I haven't seen it before. I keep forgetting that this unit is from the 2000s. I'm just not used to seeing these relatively modern transports. Well, this tray seems to be stuck fast. Oh, there we go. Well, now that it's open, let's turn it on and see what it does. Well, it's interesting that it tried to read the TOC with the tray out, so I'm going to reach inside and press that open-close switch again. It's not pulling it in. Maybe it's the limit switch. Well, let's pull the transport out, remove the tray, and see what condition that belt is in. And we've got this flat flex that's just friction fitted at the back. And there's two other connectors to the board. And that comes out quite easily. Well, the older Sony transports that I'm used to dealing with had a couple of screws in the end to act as tray stops. But this one doesn't. I can't immediately see what's stopping the tray coming out. But there is a little post down here that's actuating a leaf switch. See that there? So maybe I need to flip this out. Whoops. Yeah, this piece in here was held by that clip, and that's what was actuating the switch. But the tray is still stuck. Right, I think I figured it out. On either side of the tray there's these two plastic pieces here with holes, and you can put something in there and move it out, and that should release it. So I'm going to use two toothpicks. There we go. So this long shaft here isn't powered or anything. It's just kind of stabilizing the tray as it goes in and out. And this cover for the belt is thin plastic. On the older transports that was a metal plate. I think I'm going to have to remove this cog. You can see how these things really cheapened over time. And this belt doesn't feel too bad, but maybe it's just lost a bit of tension. Let's try this one, which is thinner but smaller. Right, so what about these limit switches? Well, that one isn't working at all. And that one's not perfect, but seems to be doing the job. Well, no screws for this board, so we can just unclip it, I think. No, we can't, because the motor's soldered in. Well, if I remove the belt again, we can unscrew it from this side. Okay, this one actually works in the other direction. That must be for when the tray closes. So I suspect there's nothing wrong with it after all. No, that's fine. Actually, that one's now showing good continuity as well. Which is good, because these type are a little bit tricky to clean. There's not going to be anything wrong with these motors, but I'm just going to drop some oil in there anyway. Okay, so you have to start it here where these two notches are, and then it slides across until this locates, and you can clip it in. Well, there's no alignment arrows for this. That looks right. So that's as far as it will go clockwise, which must be the tray open position. So if I click this back in now, that should be correct. Of course, I need to reinsert this piece at the back here. So let's pop this back in and see if that's done the trick. Well, it's quite a firm fit because there's actually a couple of locating pegs here next to the screw holes. There's also these slots on the front panel where it needs to slide in. So even without any screws, it feels pretty solid. Right, so let's power it up and see if that's solved the tray problem. Yeah, it looks like it. So that's the mechanical problem fixed. But now we need to address the cosmetic issues. So I'm going to remove this front panel. I'm hoping the open close button is stuck behind this PCB somewhere. And in any case, it needs a really good clean. Right, so we're powered off again. There's one screw on each side of the front panel. And no fewer than 5 screws underneath. I think the transport just fell out because I forgot it wasn't screwed down. Got another flat flex for the front panel. There's a couple of grounding wires down here for the headphone preamp, and I think those are the only thing holding it on now. Three screws for this little board. And again, instead of unclipping this wire here and snipping these cable ties, I'll just unscrew the PCB from the front. Oh no, the missing button isn't down the front. Well, this is where the missing button was, and it had this sort of retainer piece that acts as a hinge. If it was similar to these other buttons, which have got quite a wide collar, I don't know how it came out of the front. Like if one of these was to snap off, I don't think there's any way it could come out of that hole. Also, I can't just swap it for, say, the lesser used pause button because it's physically smaller. By the way, these must be the smallest skip forward and back buttons I've ever seen on a full-sized player. I don't know why they couldn't have made those a bit larger. Well, while I'm thinking about how to overcome that missing button, I'll just remove this power button board. Now I can give this front panel a much needed clean. A couple of people recently have left comments asking what my procedure is for cleaning the plastic parts. And it's basically just dish soap with a soft toothbrush. And the reason I use dish soap is because if you use any other chemicals, you never know how it's going to react with the plastic. And this is a case in point because I've just cleaned this, believe it or not. And what I thought was general grime is actually a lot worse than that. It looks like something is eaten into the plastic itself. So on this occasion I am going to try something a bit more aggressive. Of course, anything like this will come off if you scrub hard enough, but the danger of course is in rubbing away the graphics. I'm going to try this Plastex, which is obviously designed to polish plastic, therefore we know it won't do it any harm. Probably a bit too much. I don't know if this stuff is mildly abrasive or whether it's some sort of chemical base. Well, that has made a significant improvement. There is one area here that still might need further work, but it's a relief anyway that it wasn't permanent. It'll be more pronounced on this piece, of course. Yep, it's coming off there as well. It's certainly got the worst of it off, but there are still signs of water droplets or whatever it was. So I'm just going to keep polishing until they come out. I think they've come up okay, about as well as I can get them. So I'm going to refit this lens into here and move on to the missing parts. So for the tray front, I'm thinking of cutting a piece of plastic out of this old fascia for a mini disc deck that is now long defunct, because it would be the right kind of plastic and it has this kind of brushed effect that would match this. And this is a nice thickness too. It's not going to warp or deform and it's easily wide enough for what I need. As for the missing button, I found this piece of dowel which happens to be exactly the right dimension. It's just a little bit of wiggle room in there. So I thought that if I form a dome on this end, I could use it to create a mold. I haven't quite figured out how to do it yet, but I could create a mold into something, then pour maybe molten plastic or maybe some epoxy resin, and that should be all I need. And then I just need to figure out how to make a hinge for it. So I just need to attach it to here, and then I could add this post at the bottom, which is what actuates the tactile switch. So I think the first thing to do is cut a length of this off. I can then put that in a drill chuck and form that dome with some fine sandpaper. Well, the dowel just about fits in this drill chuck, so I'm just going to treat it like a lathe. I think that's quite nice. It's subtle, so I'm just going to use some finer sandpaper to clean it up. Well, I'm now wondering, rather than using this as a mould, whether I just use this as the button. I was thinking of maybe painting it in black acrylic, then heating up a thin plastic film and then just pushing it over it to give it a bit of a gloss. Not sure how well that would work, but I think it's worth a go. Then on the other side, I'd obviously stick some sort of collar on here to stop it coming out again. I just need to make sure I get it at the right depth. And to cut it off perfectly flush, I could put it back in the chuck, and then while it's spinning, just hold a saw blade against it and it would eventually cut right through. I can choose exactly what depth I want. I can just imagine everybody screaming, just buy a 3D printer. But sometimes when you don't have the right tool, you have to be resourceful. So that's what it looks like sitting flush. And I actually think if I use a piece of cardboard as the back plate, that would work best. Then I could use wood glue to stick it and it would never come off. I think I'm going to break off the remainder of the old hinge and then cut this semicircle out of here. Then the cardboard would act as the new hinge. Well, I just snapped that off by mistake. So I'm going to punch out the semicircle using this single hole punch, which isn't big enough, but I can just keep nibbling around it. It's a bit big actually. I'm going to try that again. That's better. And I'm going to paint this black just in case you can see it around the edges of the button. By the way, if you're ever doing anything like this, always use black acrylic. Don't be tempted to use a black permanent marker, because they're never really black. There's always a sort of reddish sheen to them. Never blends in properly. So now I can cut my hole with the craft knife. I'm going to attempt to re-stick this broken part. I'm also going to put some glue just on this edge here to strengthen that bond. And a quick spritz of accelerator. Now I'm just going to sit that in place and mark the hole, because I'm going to remove the masking tape from this area. Doesn't have to be precise, because that's where I'll use the wood glue to stick the button. I can trim this down. I'm just going to temporarily stick it to this slightly smaller dowel so I can paint it black without getting paint all over my fingers. Just gives a really rich deep black. So at this point I tried melting some clear plastic to give the button a bit of a sheen, and the first one I tried was too thick. So I tried this thin polythene instead, but neither of them really worked, and so I abandoned that idea altogether. I might just brush on some PVA glue. That would give it a higher sheen than it currently has. I don't know, it looks a little bit milky, but let's see how it goes. So stick it onto the hinge. Well, no, it's never going to look as good as the original, but as long as it's functional and reliable, I'll be happy with that. So while that button is drying fully, I'm going to take some measurements for the tray front. And I had a look at a picture online of a complete unit, and there was just a small margin between the front of the tray and the aperture. I don't have a good way of cutting this straight, so I think I'm going to have to cut it oversize and then sand it down. Well, this steel ruler happens to be 20mm wide. That's going to sit in there quite nicely with a margin. Well, because it drops down here, I can actually use this as one of the edges. So these are my actual size lines, but I'm going to cut beyond them and then gently file it down. Well, I was so happy with my wider cut that I decided to just cut to the line. I don't think I'm 100% straight, but it's probably good enough. And to cut it horizontally, I'm just going to score it a few times. It'll hopefully snap off. You know, with a fresh blade, I think I can cut through this with a utility knife. I just got most of the way through cutting this bit off, and it would give me a perfect straight edge. If I clamp this and the ruler to the edge of the table, it should be easy. Right, sorry about the Dutch angle, but I've got the ruler clamped to the plastic to the edge of the desk on top of this cutting mat. Got a brand new blade in my knife, and so with enough passes, it should cut right through. Well, with a bit of sanding, obviously I've got to round the edges, this might actually look okay. It took a while and it's not perfect, but I think that's going to look pretty good. And the new button still looks a little bit milky. Maybe it's not quite as loose in there as I would like. Well, just have to see if it works. It's because the other buttons have got this taper to them, whereas this one doesn't. So when you push it in, this leading edge is getting caught on the surround. It might actually be easier to remount the hole than to sand down the button. I've opened up the hole a bit and it does now feel a lot better. So I'm going to continue with the reassembly. Right, I need to measure how far it is from this hole to this switch, because I need to add a post to here to actuate the switch. Well, I could use a toothpick because it's roughly the same diameter as these existing posts, but the post doesn't need to be thin as long as it hits the switch. So I might just use this dowel because that's going to stick a lot better to the cardboard. I think this would just break off. So here's my switch actuator. I'm hoping I've got my measurements right. Just holding this board in here as a test, and that button is getting stuck. So I think I need to remount that hole a bit more. Okay, I've done it a bit more and that is now so much better. I think this is going to work. Going to give the lens a clean, bit of preventative maintenance. Refit this flat flex. And the headphone volume knob. And I think this is the only 2004 album I've got in my collection. Will that open close button work? Lovely. It's not the fastest at reading a disc. Players tended to get slower at that into the 2000s. Well, it's fast enough at searching for tracks. As you can see, this does have a display off feature. I don't like the fact that these track numbers along the bottom are grouped in pairs. This big gap between the 2 and the 3, the 4 and the 5, that's pretty annoying. I think it's because the VFT works in columns and there has to be a division between each column, but it still looks pretty nasty. And yeah, these track skip buttons are just ridiculously small. Presumably you hold it down to fast forward. Yeah. But at least one thing you're guaranteed with a younger player is table of contents permanence. Yes. One thing this player does, which is a little unusual, is that it has a self-closing tray. If you open it and leave it open for, I think it's about 30 seconds, it will close itself. I guess that's to stop dust ingress or the potential for tray damage. I quite like that feature. Well, the last thing to do, of course, is to stick the tray front on. And because the tray itself is recessed a fair bit, there's about an 8mm gap that I need to make up in order for the tray front to sit flush. I decided to make the spacer by stacking layers of thin card. So I drew out the shapes I needed using a vector graphics program, saved them as SVG files, and cut them out using my Cricut Maker. The whole process took less than half an hour. So here are my cut-out pieces. I'm not sure if I've got enough. And of course, a 3D printer would do a better job. But again, sometimes you just have to use the tools you have available. So in case it's not clear what I'm doing, I'm essentially making a 3D print using layers, but just using card instead of plastic. So on this tray there's a notch at the front that the original tray front would have slipped over. And so these pieces of card, if I've got my measurements correct, will do the same thing. And if I stick them all together, then they'll obviously get thicker and take up that gap. Then these parts stuck together will take up this gap, and then that should bring us flush with the front here. And then these solid pieces will go on here, and then I can stick my plastic piece on the front of that. I don't have enough of these, I'm going to have to cut some more, because the total thickness of this needs to be 8mm, and it's currently only 5. So it's going to take some time to glue all these together, but when I do, I should have a fairly solid piece that I can clip onto the front here. And that means the new tray front will be removable, which is important if the transport needs to be removed in future. Here's the finished piece. So then that should now fit onto the end here. And when it's pushed in, that will basically be flush. In the end, I decided to just stick a piece of card on top to neaten it up. And I think this contact adhesive is going to be the best glue. So I'll just put a thin layer of contact adhesive on there. And I'll do the same on the back of the plastic piece. And I'll just let those dry for a couple of minutes. Okay, that's now dry. So I can mount this piece. And making sure the orientation is correct, because this is the good edge. This is my cut edge, which will go at the bottom. Can hopefully drop this into the perfect position. There, doesn't look too bad. And it's nice and flush as well, which is exactly what I wanted. Well, the final thing to test is the CD text function. And I wasn't sure that any of my discs would feature that. But then after trying a few, OK Computer came up trumps. And there you can see it. I mean, it's a pretty useless feature because very few discs have it, and it will disappear after a couple of seconds. I don't have the remote for this, but maybe there's a feature on that that displays it permanently. And the title appears again when you press stop. I've been listening to the Marantz while editing this video, and I have to say that I'm a big fan of it. It has an elegant simplicity that I really love, and my new tray front, which omits the compact disc logo, actually enhances that look. I'm even going to buy an aftermarket remote control and have this as my main player, at least until my head gets turned by something else. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.